The knock came just before dawn, heavy and deliberate. The kind that makes your chest tighten before your mind can even catch up. It rolled through the small, worn-down apartment like a warning from a past that refused to stay buried. Daniel Carter froze where he stood, hands still wrapped around a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee, his heart hammering so loudly it nearly drowned out the second knock. Whoever or whatever was standing behind that thin wooden door was something he had been unknowingly waiting for his entire life. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that even the smallest good deed can return to you in the most unexpected ways, take a second right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because this story just might change the way you look at the world. Daniel Carter wasn't always this exhausted, this ground down by life. There was a time when his laughter filled every room he walked into and his dreams stretched far beyond the gray walls that now closed in around him. But life has a way of reshaping people, of bending even the toughest spirits under the weight of loss and responsibility. 5 years earlier, Daniel had buried his wife, Emily Carter, after a sudden illness that left him shattered and alone with their 3-year-old daughter, Lily Carter. From that day forward, every breath he drew felt like it was carrying the weight of 2 lives. His mornings started before the sun came up and his nights ended long after the city went quiet. He worked 2 jobs, one as a janitor in a downtown office building, the other delivering groceries deep into the night. His hands stayed rough, his eyes stayed tired. But the moment he looked at Lily, none of it mattered. She was the only reason he kept pushing, the reason he endured the relentless exhaustion and the quiet loneliness that crept in whenever the world went still. Their apartment was small and barely enough, peeling paint on every wall and a heater that worked only when it felt like cooperating. But it was home. It was where Lily's laughter bounced off the walls, where bedtime stories melted into dreams, and where Daniel showed up every single day to fight for a future brighter than his present. But even the strongest hearts have a breaking point. Bills had started stacking up again. Rent was 2 months overdue and the landlord's patience was running out fast. The school had sent home a notice about unpaid fees, and Lily's shoes had worn down so badly that cardboard had become a temporary fix. Daniel had reached a place where hope felt like something he simply couldn't afford anymore. And then came the knock. Standing on the other side of that door was a man who looked completely out of place in that crumbling hallway. Tall, composed, dressed in a sharp-tailored suit that spoke of real power and wealth. The man carried an air about him that commanded attention without saying a single word. His name was Alexander Hayes, a name that showed up in headlines, boardrooms, and industries across the country. CEO of a global corporation, a man whose decisions could move markets and reshape lives overnight. But what on earth was someone like him doing here? Daniel cracked the door open slowly, confusion written all over his face. The air between them felt thick, charged with something neither of them had said yet. Alexander Hayes looked at him, not with arrogance, but with a quiet intensity that put Daniel on edge. He spoke carefully, each word landing with deliberate weight. It was time, he said, for Daniel Carter to repay what he owed. The words didn't add up. Daniel's mind went scrambling, searching every corner of his memory for some connection to this powerful stranger. There was nothing. He had never crossed paths with this man before. He had never set foot in a world where people like Alexander Hayes operated. And yet here he was, standing at his door, asking for repayment. The silence between them stretched and grew heavier. Daniel's first instinct was fear, fear of losing the little he still had, fear that his already fragile life was about to come apart at the seams. But Alexander didn't push his way inside. He didn't demand money or drop any kind of threat. Instead, he held out a plain envelope and told Daniel to open it when he was ready to understand. Then, just like that, he walked away. The hallway went quiet again. But the air felt different now, like something that couldn't be undone had already been set in motion. Daniel shut the door slowly, hands trembling as he turned the envelope over in his fingers. It was plain, no markings, no name, but it felt heavier than it had any right to, as if it were carrying more than just paper inside. When he finally opened it, his entire world shifted. Inside was a photograph, old, slightly faded around the edges. It showed a much younger Daniel sitting on a bench at a bus stop in the middle of a downpour. Next to him sat a man, thin, disheveled, clearly at the end of his rope. Daniel remembered that day the instant he saw it. It was more than a decade ago, long before life had taken its darkest turns. He had been young, barely scraping by himself, but still holding on to the belief that doing right by people actually mattered. That day, he had noticed the man beside him, soaked through, shaking from the cold. Without a second thought, Daniel had handed over his jacket, bought him a hot meal, and given him the last cash he had on him. It hadn't felt like anything significant at the time, just a moment, a simple human thing to do. He never expected to see that man again. But now, staring down at that photograph, it hit him all at once. The man in that picture was Alexander Hayes, the same powerful CEO who had just been standing at his door. The envelope also held a letter, handwritten and clearly thought through. In it, Alexander laid out the whole story. That afternoon at the bus stop had been the lowest point of his entire life. He had lost everything. His job, his home, any sense of who he was or where he was going. The world had looked right through him. But Daniel's small act of kindness had quietly cracked something open inside him. It reminded him that he still mattered, that there was still a road back if he was willing to walk it. And walk it he did. Years of grinding effort, painful failures, and stubborn determination had carried Alexander to where he stood today. But he had never once forgotten the man who showed up for him when nobody else would. Now it was time to return what had been given, just not in the way Daniel was expecting. The days that followed pulled Daniel into a current of change he hadn't been prepared for. Alexander didn't hand him money. Instead, he offered something that cut much deeper, a real opportunity. A steady job with honest pay, flexible hours, and benefits that meant Lily would never have to go without again. He made sure her education was taken care of, opening doors to the kind of future Daniel had spent years dreaming about for her. But more than any of that, Alexander handed Daniel something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. At first, Daniel didn't know how to take it. Pride, disbelief, and a quiet fear all tangled up inside him at once. He had been surviving on his own for so long that someone stepping in to help felt almost impossible to trust. But slowly, as weeks replaced days, he began to understand that this wasn't charity. This was a return, something he had given away freely, without a single expectation, coming back to him in full. Life started shifting in ways Daniel hadn't let himself imagine. The grinding pressure that had become a permanent fixture in his chest slowly began to ease. Lily's laughter grew louder, lighter, unburdened in a way it had never been before. Their cramped apartment gave way to a modest but comfortable home, one that finally felt like a place where something good could grow. And through every bit of it, Daniel held onto the lesson that had brought him to this moment. Kindness is never wasted. Even the smallest thing you do for someone can send ripples out through time in directions you'll never be able to track. So before this story wraps up, take a moment and drop in the comments. Have you ever done something kind for someone without expecting a single thing back? Or has someone's kindness shown up in your life in a way you'll carry with you forever? Because stories like this aren't just stories. They're proof that good still exists in this world, and that it finds its way back. Years later, Daniel would find himself standing at another door. Not as a man in need, but as someone who finally had something real to offer. And as he raised his hand to knock, something settled inside his chest that he couldn't quite name but had been chasing for a long time. The circle had closed. Kindness had found its way home. If the story moved you even a little, go ahead and comment, and pass it along to someone who could use it today. Because sometimes the smallest story is the one that starts something big.